afternoon. Welcome back to another edition of Diving Deep with Shalita and Kareem. We have some really important and good things to talk about today. So, what are we going to talk about today?
Today is probably going to be our most controversial topic to date because it's a very hot button topic in the media lately. And you've had, as soon as I give out these names, people are going to know what direction we're going with this. But Nick Cannon and Deshaun Jackson and a few others who have made comments in the media, and they've been called anti-Semitic comments. And so what our topic today is going into companies, most of which are United States companies who played a part in the Holocaust. And these are companies and these are things that have happened that have kind of been swept under the rug. And so we kind of want to get into these companies and shed a little bit of light on what their part was in the Holocaust. A lot of people don't know. I shouldn't say a lot of people don't know because I don't know what a lot of people don't know. But, there are a lot of companies out there that have their past has basically been erased in the sense where it's not a part of their company image or company history and things like that. And we don't hold these things against them. And I'm not saying that we should, but having this information, you'll be better equipped to judge how you want to deal with these companies or what you think of them. One company in particular that I like out of this whole list, not that I like, but that I found was interesting was Kodak, simply because Kodak about a week ago got a huge government contract. I believe it was something like $765 million that they were given in what was considered a loan. Kodak is supposed to get into the business of creating raw materials for generic medicines. And ironically, one of those generic medicines that they're going to be making is hydroxychloroquine, which that's been very controversial lately.
Kodak's making medicine?
Yes, that's what the contract company. But Kodak was actually a company who was involved in the Holocaust. There's a man named Wilhelm Kepler. He was one of Hitler's top advisors, and he advised Kodak and a bunch of other American companies that it would be very beneficial to them if they were to fire their Jews, the Jews that work for them. Hitler had an idea, and this is the part that's usually left out of the Holocaust. What got Hitler started on his journey of doing all the things that he did? And this is not to praise Hitler. I'm not speaking one way or another. Our goal here at Diving Deep is to give facts, not to be conspiracy theorists, not to draw our own conclusions, but to give facts that you don't have to go to the deep web for, or you don't have to be a part of this cult or over here. The thing is, things that are easily searchable on the internet. Our job as hosts, we compile the facts and present them, but everything that we're saying, you can research on your own and come to your own conclusions. So three of the things that Hitler did, one of the first things that he did was he banned all pornography in Germany. The second thing that he did was he banned all prostitution and homosexuality. The third thing he did is he banned interest, which anybody who's a biblical scholar or who read Leviticus, that charging interest was one of the things that Jews or the Hebrews were not. I should not say Jews. Hebrews were not allowed to do. And so Hitler viewed the Jews as basically the scum of the earth and that they were ruining the earth because they were charging interest. And so he went on a campaign to stop allowing banks to charge interest on loans. Now, that's where we get into, a lot of Jewish companies didn't want to cooperate. They wanted to continue charging interest because they realized they were making a ton of money off interest. There were several banks like Chase Bank. Chase Bank was a bank that cooperated. And another thing that's going to be interesting is all of the companies that I'm going to mention are still in business today. The Holocaust, which happened in the 1940s. So we're saying, these companies this is an event that happened 80 years ago. And these companies are all still alive and still thriving. Chase Bank helped the Nazi Party by freezing the bank accounts of Jewish people. Getting back to Kodak, what they did was they fired, and not just Kodak, some of the other American companies fired Jewish employees. Another company that's around, Hugo Boss. Hugo Boss, which they dropped the Hugo because Hugo was the father. A few years later, the son took over. But Hugo Boss was actually a member of the Nazi Party. And 8 years after he started his company, he got the contract to make Nazi uniforms. He made the SS Trooper uniforms, and he also made Hitler's Youth Division, which I think at the height, the Youth Division had over 800,000 children in it. So you figure that's a contract potentially for 800,000 youth uniforms. This is one of the things that helped propel Hugo Boss into a worldwide clothing designer and manufacturer, because he had this huge contract, basically a governmental contract. And another thing is, because this contract was so huge, and the supply that he had to put out, one of the things that Hugo Boss acquired was slave labor. They were using Polish and other children, Jewish children, to make those clothing, those uniforms. There's another man. His name is Ferdinand Porsche, right? Ferdinand Porsche came to Hitler, and they were discussing on how to make a car, which they call the people's car, right? And he asked Hitler, how should it be designed? Hitler said, make it streamlined, like the shape of a beetle. And that became the name of it also. So we got the Volkswagen Beetle. Ferdinand Porsche is the man behind Porsche and Volkswagen. So not only did Hitler design the Volkswagen Beetle, he named it. Volkswagen translates to people's car. Wow. There's another company, and this company, during the time of the Holocaust, it was Ig Farben, right? It was a medicine company. After the Holocaust, they broke up into 3 smaller companies, but the company then changed this name to Bayer, the aspirin company. What Bayer did, or what Ig Farben did, was they're the company that made the Zyklon D that they used in the gas chambers. This is Bayer, the aspirin company. They're still around. Volkswagen, still around. Kodak, still around.
No,
another company.
What did you say? What was Kodak's involvement in the Holocaust?
So Kodak, they provided film and things like that, because Kodak had a German division in Kodak, and they were providing film to have everything documented and things like that. But one of Hitler's top advisors, Wilhelm Kepler, he worked for Kodak and he advised Kodak to fire their Jewish employees.
Okay, yeah, I remember. Okay.
So Siemens is a manufacturing company. Siemens has done pretty much everything under the sun, creating different things, creating electronics, they're just a huge company, and they're right in Pennsylvania. But Siemens actually created the gas chambers that were in concentration camps like Auschwitz and places like that. They made the gas chambers and used slave labor to make those gas chambers. So that's Siemens. Another company that people may be shocked to find out played a role in the Holocaust. During the time of World War II, there was an embargo, a trade embargo with Germany, which meant that we couldn't trade goods with them. So Coca-Cola, eventually they ran out of syrup to make their Coca-Cola soda, because Coca-Cola was still selling soda to both sides. When they ran out of syrup, they could no longer import that syrup into Germany. So they had to come up with a new soda that was designed directly for Nazi soldiers. You have any idea what that soda is? We talked about it before.
We did. It was Fanta. Yeah, Fanta. My favorite strawberry.
That's the thing. Fanta was designed for Nazis. It was a way to get around that trade embargo. It wasn't until after the war died down, or the war ended, I should say, and they had to rebrand it and figure out how to market it in a way, to where we can market these sodas to Americans. And that's when we got the Fanta Girls. That was a rebranding it was a marketing strategy to now market it worldwide, because the soda was a hit. The Nazi soldiers loved it. So just know that Fanta was originally designed for Nazis. So of all the things that are anti-Semitic, like Nick Cannon, making his claim that, black people can't be anti-Semitic because they're the real Semitic people. How does a Jewish person feel every time they walk into a supermarket and see a Fanta soda? Is that not anti-Semitic? That here it is, I got to go in here, and every time I want to buy a Sprite, right to the left or to the right, here's a soda being sold that was designed for Nazis.
Yeah, I heard that even NASA was founded by some Nazi soldiers that came over that that the U.S. basically absolved from war crimes, and these Nazis helped found NASA as we know today.
Wow.
Something else people don't know as well, I'm not sure if you know this, and I'm sure everyone has driven a Ford. Ford was extremely anti-Semitic. I mean, like he has a whole book called the Jewish Problem or something like that. I forgot exactly what it's called, and he was shut down like some people are today. But he had enough money. He built his own printing press, all to like disgrace the Jews' name, which a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, Ford was open about his anti-Semitism.
Yes.
He made no secrets about hiding it. He actually also made vehicles for the Nazis. And on top of that, Henry Ford was given an award, the Nazi Distinguished Medal for Foreigners. He was given a medal by the Nazis. And Ford is one of the top auto manufacturers in America, still thriving and doing well.
You don't get more American than Ford.
Yeah, Ford and Chevy is about as American as you can get. Yes. Top three: Ford, Chevy, and Dodge. But Ford they're alive and well. And another company, Standard Oil. So Standard Oil, their role is that the Nazi Air Force, the Luftwaffe or Luftwaffe, however you pronounce it, they needed a fuel called tetraethyl lead fuel, right? It was the fuel that their airplanes used, and their planes could not have flown without that oil, without that fuel. So Standard Oil provided that fuel for them during the war. Now, when Standard Oil broke up, right after the war, they broke up into three companies, because that's a strategy that you usually use when this company was involved, and now you want to erase your company's name or the attachment that your company has with a certain name, because once a certain company does a certain thing, they're always going to be associated with that thing. So what happens is Standard Oil breaks up, and they break up into ExxonMobil, British Petroleum, which we call BP, and Chevron. And all three of those gas companies or fuel companies are still around to this day.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just like, it's crazy how all these companies supported the Holocaust. The Holocaust that's the hallmark of anti-Semitism, because the goal was to kill people who were believed to be Semitic in origin, right? So it's odd that none of these companies went out of business after the Holocaust. Another company was IBM. IBM supplied computers, and they also created tracking software to monitor all the the things that were being shipped in from the Zyklon B, accounting for all the people that were in concentration camps and things like that. IBM supplied that, and as we know, I think it was 2017, but don't quote me on that, IBM actually merged with Apple. So all of these companies are still alive and well, and all of these companies played huge roles in the Holocaust. Some of the companies who benefited the most from the Holocaust were companies like Siemens and also Hugo Boss. These companies made tons of money, and they're still here today. It's just a strange thing when we get into what we consider anti-Semitic. To me, when you use that word anti-Semitic, that wasn't a term that was used at the time of the World War II or World War I. It wasn't a term that became popular until years later when people started questioning World War II and World War I and the events that took place in the years following. The term anti-Semitic was a term that was to describe anybody who showed any lack of empathy to the Jewish people. It was a term that was used to, if anybody questioned the details of what was going on in World War II, you were being anti-Semitic and you were being anti-sympathetic to all the things that we heard they went through. So in reality, the term anti-Semitic the term itself was a deterrent to stop people from looking into the Holocaust. Stop researching these things. We don't want you to look this way. Look that way. Look at the people over here who might have been a victim of this Holocaust, but don't look into the actual Holocaust itself. Don't look into the numbers we said. Don't look into the companies who participated in it. Just look over here at the people who were victims. Anti-Semitism is a word that constantly causes you to focus on the victim and not the people who were the victors, the people who profited from the Holocaust, the companies who came out making millions and billions, the companies who gained new research development. Because one of the other things that was happening during the Holocaust is there was a man named Jose Mengele. That was his name. He was one of Hitler's top scientists, and he was doing experiments with things like fluoride. He was doing all types of experiments on the human brain. What happened, a lot of people know, we were taught in history class that America joined the war pretty much when it was dying down towards the end. And they came over here and there were things that the United States wanted. One of the things that the United States wanted was that research from those scientists and from those Nazi doctors. A lot of those Nazi doctors and scientists were allowed to come back to America in exchange for the information that they had. And they were given new identities, new names, and they became American citizens. These are the same doctors that were experimenting on Jewish people. And yet they came back to America. Does it get any more anti-Semitic, any more anti-sympathetic? Does it get any more anti-sensitive than that? That these people are given a new lease on life after they destroyed lives over here. So we got to understand, this is not to create any type of anger or adversity towards Jewish people. It's about the term anti-Semitic. The term is not, it's a deterrent. It's to stop people from looking into that direction, to stop looking into the roles that different organizations played in the Holocaust. It's not to protect Jewish people. You can't protect people with a word. You don't get protected with a word. You get protected by, you can protect the companies who were involved with that word. And that's the problem that we got to get past today. What Nick Cannon said, whether it was true or not, and Nick Cannon is not the first by far. There are tons of books out there, like Rudolph Windsor. He wrote a book called Babylon to Timbuktu, which chronicles the journey that the Jews, or the Hebrews took after, and he starts, I believe he starts around 66 AD when the Jews were expelled. They were under Roman occupation at the time, and they were removed from that area. And how they had to spread down into Yemen and down into Africa, and how they, spread out all over Africa, and some of them ended up on the slave coast and things like that. He chronicles all that, and he has his sources and he has his documents and all these things to prove every statement that he's making in this book. And this is a book that I believe came out in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. But Babylon to Timbuktu, if you haven't read it, it's a great book. And okay, great. I'm glad. Well, I should have known you read it, but it's a great book. But so Nick Cannon made a statement, and he was crucified for it. Rudolph Windsor wrote a book, and they're hoping that we ignore that book. We're hoping that we don't read that book. There's other books, there's other authors out there, and another one of my favorite authors who I've read all of his books, everything that he published, and I told him, anything you publish, I am going to read it, because this brother has a unique view. He has a unique way of explaining things. Zion Lexx, Abdiel Ben Levi. He's one of my favorite authors, and I just want to put his name out there because he also wrote a book called It Was Written and Engraved, and he talks about the same things that Rudolph Windsor talked about, but he does it from from a different aspect, from an aspect that's going to be a lot harder to refute. So there are plenty of books out there that made the same statement that Nick made, but the problem is Nick had a voice, he had an audience, he had a platform, and you can't start opening up doors. That's the problem. They don't want those doors open. They don't want those books like Rudolph Windsor's book from the 70s. They don't want those books reopened. They don't want Zion Lexx's book open to a larger audience of people who are going to read it, because then it starts to unravel what the term anti-Semitism is designed to protect. It's just like, to give you another example, when Kennedy was assassinated, the term conspiracy theorist was not used before the Kennedy assassination. When people started questioning the details of the Kennedy assassination, they came up with that term conspiracy theorist, and they made them look like anybody who's going to question a man who got shot in his head on, in broad daylight on TV. The fact that he got assassinated is not the part that's in question. Who did it? Why it was done? Who was behind it? The motives are what was questioned, but to make sure you don't question it, you were termed a conspiracy theorist. And anybody who is termed a conspiracy theorist, you were made to look like a whack job. You look like a nut, but you were given a brain to question your surroundings. When you sniff, your nose is questioning the smells in your environment. Everything that you look at, your eye is questioning the distance. It's measuring the distance of how far away it is from you. It's measuring the color. It's measuring the texture. When you hear something, your ears are questioning how far away a thing is from you. Is it approaching you? Is it coming towards you? Your brain is a question creating machine. That's all it does. And so when you decide that, okay, since somebody said this is right or this is not right, and you take that answer and you run with it, what you do, they call it cognitive dissonance, but I like to draw pictures instead of using terms. You're basically making the choice to turn off your brain and allow somebody else to think for you. We have to think for ourselves, especially in today's society. We have to ask questions. You cannot afford to not ask questions with all the things that are going on in the world. If we continue to allow it, they have this saying that it's the victor in war who gets to write history. The losers don't get to write their story. They're dead. So the only person who gets to write the story is the victor. And the victor wants to be immortalized. They want to be memorized for their heroic deeds. They don't want to be, jotted down in history and immortalized for being a coward or being a traitor or a liar or any of those things. We want to be remembered as being great. And so you got to remember that you always have to look at history skeptically. You always have to have a little bit of curiosity about the authenticity or the accuracy of things, and like I said, this is not to bash any culture of people, but there are roadblocks in humanity that we can't get past until we properly address certain things, until we properly research them and put facts in order. There are companies that literally became major corporations off the backs of the people who suffered during the Holocaust. Just like there are companies who profited off the backs of Black people who were slaves in this country, off of Native Americans who were the original inhabitants of this country. There's always been a group of people who are willing to profit off of another group of people. And the people who were doing the profiting usually were also the same group who were allowed to write their version of the story. Because we can see in history books now, we all know what history was like. We know what we were taught when we were kids, and we can now see our children are getting a different interpretation of what slavery was. That these generous people who financed their own boats went over to Africa and saw the conditions and how horrible it was there, and they decided to give these Africans a new lease on life and brought them to America and gave them a chance to work for wages and create a life for themselves. And we know that's not what slavery was. It's being cleaned up, it's being, as we'll say, whitewashed, and it's being toned down from the actual reality of it. Why don't we believe that same toning down process happened throughout all of history? When we look at the Haitian Revolution, when we look at the Geechee Gullah Revolution down in South Carolina, and we see what that was really about. The stories that we're getting now don't line up with what the stories were 20 years ago. They don't line up with the descendants who actually have those stories passed down from their elders. They don't match anymore.
Yeah.
So, and we're getting to a point now where we don't care as much about those things. So a few years from now, our children's children, they'll be able to be programmed with whatever somebody wants to tell them, because we've lowered that resistance to BS. We've lowered that resistance to, okay, this doesn't sound right. That spider senses are tingling. That's not what grandma told me. That's not what my great grandma said.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another thing, when we start disrespecting our elders, and when we stop cherishing the wisdom of elders, we create a break in time. We create a break in our lineage, that we no longer have access to that because we no longer respect it. This is why no matter what religion you look into, they always revere the wisdom of the ancients. When they look back in time, whether, I'm not elevating it to the point of ancestral worship, but they looked at their ancestors as people who carried a certain amount of wisdom. They looked at their village elder as a person who carried a library of wisdom. And so we got to get back to the point of respecting our elders, because they are the gatekeepers. When we look at the Holocaust, there are very few Holocaust survivors left. I believe a couple weeks ago, the last Black survivor from World War II, I believe he just died a couple months ago, I believe. But I may be wrong about that. But, the Tuskegee Airmen, only people who are alive to tell those stories now are their children, And if their children don't cherish the things that their parents, their fathers went through, if they don't cherish that memory, and if they don't continue to keep that memory alive, just like we say September 11th, never forget, we have to do the work of keeping these memories alive, but not just keeping them alive, keeping them factual and accurate, because the accuracy is important. And, so I said a lot there.
It was good stuff.
But, yeah, I got a little passionate about that, but but like I said, going back to the whole Nick Cannon thing, it's not about Nick Cannon. It's not about Deshaun Jackson. It's about them opening up a can of worms that many governments and many corporations have been trying to keep the lid on that can of worms. I think you were talking earlier about, there was another guy you were talking about. What was his name?
From the UK, is a rapper named Wiley. Yeah, he they canceled him completely. Like, they took down his YouTube, they took down his Twitter, his Instagram. You can only find him on TikTok now. And once I heard of what happened, I went and checked him out. He actually has really good music. So he goes on TikTok now, because that's the only platform he has, because the powers that be shut that all the way down, like 48 hours or less. Yeah. Wow. So I'm actually pretty nervous doing these videos, because we're trying to get our thing started. I don't want to get canceled before we even get started.
Well, even if that is the case, and if that is the case, then I hope the people who do get to see this video understand that censoring is real.
Well, thank you for all that information. That was a pretty hot topic, and I really hope that we don't get censored like some of these other people have for what we've talked about. And I hope everyone enjoyed the video, which is going to actually lead us into our next video of speaking of censoring and how our freedom of speech is being attacked in 2020. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.